ask for thoughts from the advocates and others who might be affected by any changes we might make within the local purchasing incentive. So the definition of local, for example, or the way we use local. So.
Sure. Okay, for the record, I'm Betsy Rosenbluth. I'm the project director of Vermont Feed at Shelburne Farms and part of the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network. So thank you for having me. I'm just going to make a couple of points and then happy to answer questions. We also have Abby Willard with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and I believe Helen Wortvet might be on Zoom. And my apologies, we have to be down in appropriations shortly. So just to back up a little bit, because we've been working on this local food incentive program for a number of years and have looked at programs somewhat similar in other states, that the intent, it was really a dual intent, right? So to get fresh Vermont food to Vermont kids, at the same time benefiting Vermont farmers and producers. And that's the beauty of it, is that win-win to be able to do both. What we also saw in other states, which I think we're already seeing even early on with this program that's just getting rolling, is that it puts pressure on the supply chain to respond to this increase in demand, right? So in New York, there's more processing of New York product that qualifies for their local purchasing incentive. In Michigan, there's new distributors, and distributors are carrying more Michigan fruits and vegetables. And you guys heard a couple of weeks ago from the food hubs that testified on Farm to School Awareness Day that there's farms who are tripling and quadrupling what they're selling to schools. And the food hub has seen increased sales as well. So we're seeing that pressure, we're seeing some of that response, and we are confident over time this will grow and that we'll see more of that product getting into schools. We don't want to be changing the definition of local and have unintended consequences that don't benefit Vermont farmers and producers. So I just want to say that intent is really important. We don't want the schools to move to buying ground beef from New York producers at this point when they could be buying from Vermont beef producers, or that over time that market grows for Vermont beef producers and we can make that happen. So if you want to pursue additional ways of qualifying local food for the local food incentive, we would recommend a lot of restrictions so it doesn't start to replace what we're hoping will be an increase in purchasing from Vermont and benefiting the Vermont agricultural economy. And I guess I would say two other things. And one is that I do work with the farm to school advocates across the 7 Northeast states, and everybody's interested in getting to a New England product, that everybody's looking at a local food incentive in their state. And over time, maybe we can get to that reciprocal relationship where Vermont farmers can sell to Massachusetts schools, a lot more meals down there. And, vice versa, we allow school nutrition programs to be buying, especially on those border towns where they have great relationships with the farmers. So, but we're not there yet. I think we're learning, and I think that might be a separate goal to work towards, some kind of regional food shed for this or other purposes. But the intent for this one was to really try to incentivize a growth and create a stable and expanded market for Vermont producers. And the last point, because you have me here, is that because we are looking to continue the program at the level of $500,000 in base funding, and hoping that that will be in the budget memo, that would be helpful. So we're going down to appropriations after this. But, schools right now are working on their local purchasing. So knowing that funding is available, so that they can continue to do that work, is really important. So I don't know if that raised more questions or.
our reason for bringing this all up was that there's a farm, local in-state farm, that's selling ground beef to school. And then now he's gonna have to take his beef out of state to process it,
Yep,
to bring it back. Is
Yeah.
that still gonna qualify as local?
yep. So we did get some clarification from the AG's office and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. And I don't know, Abby, if you want to share the results of that, or you want me to?
Yeah, we have another chair there you can pull up.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Julie.
Sure. All right, for the record, Abby Willard, Agency of Agriculture. So there is a challenge in Vermont around beef processing capacity. And so we are hearing from some beef producers that are raising Vermont animals, and not just beef, but some Vermont livestock that would meet the definition of locally grown. And then because they're unable to get slaughter appointments in Vermont, are processing out of state. And the way that the local definition is written, the intent is that they would also be harvested from within the state. But given the fact that if a grower can demonstrate or livestock producer can demonstrate that they're unable to get a slaughter appointment in Vermont and are therefore harvesting outside of the state, that would not penalize the product to no longer be considered local. The hope is that we're going to get to a place in the state where we have that livestock processing capacity and animals that are raised in this state can be processed in Vermont. So that's a conversation that the Agency of Agriculture and the Attorney General's office. So the Attorney General's office has the compliance and enforcement responsibility of the local definition. The Agency of Agriculture has the education, outreach, and partnership with the AGO on that issue.
Representative Rice.
What does demonstrate look like in that case?
Yeah, I think it's going to be managed on a case-by-case basis as the questions come up. But I think if you can say that you reached out to your normal processor and they're not taking new appointments, or you contacted one other processor in the state and they had no vacancies, and so your only option was to go to New York or Massachusetts or New Hampshire or further, then that would be a demonstration of, had done the due diligence to explore Vermont capacity options.
Because in the case of the producer we're talking about, they had so many experiences of not being able to find appointments to processors that they bought their own processor out of state.
Yep.
And so is there a way that would they be able to demonstrate that, that they're.
Yeah, we've talked about this
there?
particular example as well. So yes, I think we could. I think if we reached a point in time where we had a plethora of processing capacity in the state, that could be different, but that's not where we are today. So for now, then absolutely yes. Yeah, that's a good question.
Representative Levitt.
It's a real quick question. Some of the food nutrition folks who came to speak to us said they had great relationships with like an egg producer just across the border because they're in a border town.
Yeah.
So would you then sort of say to them, try and find an egg producer in Vermont? Or I'm just trying to figure out like what gets valued more, a long-term relationship with a small organic farmer,
Right.
or just them being in Vermont?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. We're not looking to replace those contracts, but the way the program is, that was certainly a consequence that
Okay.
it would work better for them to reach that 15-20% if they could find that product in Vermont. So
Okay.
it had that effect. It did. I'm not sure right now. I mean, hopefully over time, it'll get easier to expand the amount of local, and you can do both. You can have that direct relationship in New Hampshire and still reach your 15-20% with Vermont products.
So you guys are really just looking at Vermont products only and not border towns with like a 5-mile radius? Because that's something we talked about last week, sort of, well, if
Right.
they're, just over the river.
Right.
I mean,
But
from
I-
the standpoint of how the local definition conversations happened, and we took lots of testimony and had a lot of stakeholder conversations around the local definition, it was about benefiting the local economy, the working landscape, and businesses within the state of Vermont. So that's how we came to the local definition. There had historically been an interpretation that local was defined as Vermont plus a 30-mile radius.
Right.
And we really looked at that and contemplated what were the impacts for the state and the economy if you bought just across the state line or,
Yeah.
you know. So I would say that I think there's probably, and I don't know that I can speak to this exactly, but I doubt there's a school that's buying all of their eggs from within Vermont. And so rather than see it as an alternative, it's actually an and opportunity that you could buy from Pete and Jerry's and you could buy from, you know, a local egg producer in Vermont. So like kind of the challenge and the opportunity of kind of growing that percentage of.
Maybe you
where your
hit
food comes from.
20% and then you buy your eggs out of state.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
We've got more questions, I think. Do you need to head out?
I need to, but I think
One
you're available.
Could, maybe Abby can field it, or?
Thank you. That was very helpful of defining local producers, a little bit of processing with this choke point. Great news for this committee. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Thank you for, and happy to follow up with anything in writing with more information.
Good luck at approach.
Yeah.
Representative Rice?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think that as somebody who's maybe been pushing at this table to talk about the, you know, expanding that local definition, I'm comfortable hearing that the intent of this program is to support Vermont producers and moving forward with this program looking the way it does. I think it is worth this committee's time moving forward to talk about the many different sort of simultaneous intentions that a program like this could have moving forward, supporting Vermont producers, supporting the building of relationships between schools and local farmers who can actually spend time in the schools, and looking at the various ways in which there are climate impacts of agriculture and whether it is wise to favor something that's produced, you know, hundreds of miles away just because it's in Vermont rather than a couple miles. I just think that that's something we should keep talking about moving forward, but I'm happy for that to exist outside the context of this case.
Here, here.
Representative O'Brien?
Abby, I don't know if you're the right person to talk about this, but we've had conversations in here about whether the local food incentive numbers, that 15, 20, 25 is almost a disincentive in that they should be much more. You know, just with what local food costs, Vermont food, if you're swapping out, say, USDA commodity for local food, it's probably more expensive than what you're gonna get back in this program. So if there should be, you know, we should actually fund it far more so that there's a real incentive to do this. And at least it pays for itself, or even like if we get to 25, you know,
Yeah.
it's good for everybody.
I'm not probably the right person to answer that question just because I haven't been tracking the percentages of the participating schools at this stage to then have a sense of, you know, how much they actually are spending on that local food. And I don't know if Rosie team can speak to that, or if that's, you know, more of an opportunity for data collection as a part of the Farm to School and Early Childcare Network as we look at the local food incentive program going forward. But I think it's a great question that I admittedly don't have an answer for. Sorry, but I think it's a great question, and we should think about that.
Right. Easy to remember numbers, but whether it actually.
And I think that the percentages were based upon sound examples from other states. So it wasn't just sort of an arbitrary kind of 15, 20, 25 percentage. It was sort of what was happening in, you know, neighboring states. They were implementing similar programs. And when you look at and when you hear from Ellen Kaler about kind of like what our local procurement percentages as a state, you know, we're not at 25, 30, 45%. We're at, you know, 17.3 or whatever. I mean, I don't have the number memorized, but it's higher than we had hoped to be by this moment in time, which is a kudos and an appreciation for the effort that's gone into tracking and promoting local food procurement across the state. But it's still a relatively small percentage of our entire food choices. So it feels in line with, at least the targets feel in line with what we're currently positioned to procure, with the hope that it's going to get bigger. But I don't know if it's actually covering the costs for a school.
And that's, family policy of let's buy something local versus schools who have this potential option of a much cheaper commodity.
Right. And Representative Rice, if I might, I appreciate those three priorities to be, a consideration for all of our programs. I think the Connecting Farmers to School initiative is really addressed through our Farm to School program. I think that Betsy really quickly made reference to, as other New England states develop a local food incentive, I think we're in a better position to start then talking about buying regionally as an incentive. I think, because it would be nice for Massachusetts to buy from Massachusetts and Connecticut schools to buy from Connecticut farmers. Like, those are nice strategies to see implemented in our neighboring states. And then I think once we have that kind of general commitment, I think then we're in a good position to start looking at the regional procurement. And I think this New England Feeding New England plan, again, that Ellen Kaler and others are working on, is going to demonstrate a lot of production opportunity for the state of Vermont. And one of the ways that we could achieve that would be by selling food to other New England states and other states within the Northeast, which we already currently do. It would just be nice if that could be further incentivized by, a similar program in their state. So I hope we don't lose track of those either.
A trade maple syrup for lobster.
What every third grader wants.
Abby, while you're here, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Thank you. I was just thinking on the universal meals front, it's such a complicated topic of, recognizing the eligibility and who's going to pay for it, and the complexity of models across all the different schools, and then add the pre-K. I would just say, if we ever wonder what the ramifications and the benefits or the impact is, I think thinking about that virtuous cycle, which I'm sure you've heard about from other testimony and presenters, but that's really kind of the impetus behind the farm to school movement, is acknowledging that when you serve better food in schools, you see more meals being purchased, which results in more local food being consumed and procured, which results in a benefit to the agricultural community, which grows there is this, very self-reinforcing cycle that we're aware of and we see in farm to school, and we've documented for many years. So, while we at the administration support the governor's budget, really do appreciate the challenge that exists in, feeding all children and finding a way for people to be able to increase the amount of that food that comes from local farms, and the benefit that has to our economy. So no solution in those remarks, but just an appreciation for the challenge, and yet the importance that this has on agriculture, which is important to our agency as well as this committee.
And you call that the virtuous circle?
Yeah, they've kind of referred to it as the virtuous cycle.
Cycle.
Yeah.
I like it.
Oh, look at Teddy.
Oh, do you have it, Teddy, there?
I only have two.
Here, pass it on down to Jed. I have one already.
That's the cycle. That's all the way around.
It was as if we planned it, Teddy.
Which we did not.
Over your way, Jed.
Thank you. It's,
All right, any other questions for Abby while she's speaking? So I think I agree that with Representative Lipsky, it was useful to hear that the situation involving slaughterhouses, for example, seems to be covered.
Yeah.
It's good to hear what your collectively anyway sense of the intent of the local purchasing incentive. So we'll continue to have some conversation about it, but that was helpful to get that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, well, thank you. You're welcome to stay and we'll, if you want to, Laura, if you want to let Beth know that we're moving into some discussion, she would come back up. And maybe we can just continue talking about the local purchasing incentive and where folks think we might want to go with that. So we've got a definition of local now that we have maybe a slightly better handle on if we left it intact. We've talked about, I guess we haven't talked about it in committee, so I'll just mention this on a floating idea. And with apologies to anyone who might be affected by the suggestion that we might ask for not a new study, but an existing study to be supplemented, Rosie. So a lot of our questions have around the local purchasing incentive have been and Representative O'Brien just raised the question, is it actually an effective incentive? We know cost, we know that 15 cents doesn't go as far as it did 2 years ago or 3 years ago when the bill was first discussed. We've talked about ground beef specifically and the price differential there between a commodity and a local product, but that's the only product really where we've had that conversation or collected any information. I think it would be difficult maybe for the committee to do a thorough study on that. So a thought, and Rosie, while you're here, you can provide impromptu feedback if you're so inclined, but don't want to put you on the spot, but would be to ask the agency to include in its report next year. I think the report is intended to come out each year. Not just a list of participating schools, but dig into a little bit. And just I'm thinking of it as a one-time thing. But what products are actually being purchased? What are the costs actually that the schools are incurring? And then ask for any recommendations that the agency might have on changing dollar amounts, changing percentages, having had an additional year of information at that point. Any other insights it might have on how to make the program more effective.
So I will respond that in general, we're very cautious about being able to take on new work without new people. And so I'm not really clear what level of additional work you're asking for. I know Connor did share with you some additional information about what the schools who received the incentive purchased. And that was fairly easy for us to pull. And I think we would be happy to continue to pull that for you without having to put in an actual study. So if that's the sort of information that you're looking for, we can just provide that to you because that is information that we'll have gathered. In terms of whether you should escalate the per meal rate, one thing you may want to think about is just putting in a cost escalator tied to inflation. And that would mean that you wouldn't need to revisit this continuously. And then in terms of whether that per meal incentive is high enough, I will say, we had lots of interest and we had schools who tried to achieve the 15% this year and came up short. And we heard from them that they would continue to try next year. So it is a number that is currently providing an incentive. I don't know that the intention was ever to actually pay the full additional cost to purchase local, but just to try and push, provide a little carrot to push people more in that direction. So certainly it's a valid policy discussion to have, but I don't think that we have a particular I guess that's my response there. You may want to consider an escalator. I'm not excited about doing a huge new study without additional staff to do that study. But if the information that we did provide to you already was helpful, then that's something that we can certainly continue to provide without legislative language to that effect.
Thank you. So I'll just throw it back to committee on what you're thinking right now, we want to do here. If anybody feels strongly. Yes,
I'd like to continue the food incentive from.
continue it, okay, right, so the funding piece, we've heard a number of times, $500,000, and I think what we'll do if there's an agreement to continue that funding, we'll recommend that level to appropriations along with the other recommendations that we make.
Are you looking for a motion for
No,
that?
no, that'll be part of a larger conversation though next week, yeah.
Did we know how much was not used of the 500?
We did know, yep,
Like 146,000 wasn't used. It was like 300 and something.
that sounds about right.
Upper 300s.
Got it somewhere, but that, yeah, somewhere in that ballpark. So, yeah, Representative Wright.
Just the independent schools piece is the other new.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I think everyone, I didn't hear anybody object last week when we mentioned that, I think we want to include that in the next. That's one thing we know we want to include, if nothing else, yeah, making independent schools eligible.
Can I
Right.
ask you to be specific about whether you want to make state-approved independent schools or state-recognized independent schools or both?
We will
Eligible?
we will be specific, and I think I think a state approved is what we have in mind, but we'll be specific and here, I'm happy to have your feedback on that too.
We can do any of those. They're different types and so we need to know which type you're intending to make the benefit available to.
Representative Rice, question?
Nope.
Comment?
My only comment was that I think our thinking, as we discussed it, was sort of to have the qualification be in line with the universal school, because we're talking about it in the context of universal school meals, making it the ability to qualify for the local food incentive line up with the independent school food authorities that are qualifying for universal school meals as well. So that same sort of like, and we can talk about that further, but that was the context in which we talked about it, was that this local food incentive had been enacted in Act 67, and that everything in there was public schools only, and that was why it wasn't open to independent school SFAs. And in bringing it over here, we would be lining it up with this and making it available. Does that make sense?
So I think, I'm not sure if that was the original intent. I think that there was some concern back when that was passed about just not wanting to make the money available to independent schools. I think that we can implement that, but I'm a little bit confused now about whether you're wanting to limit it. So right now it's paid out on a per meal rate based on the meal served in the prior year. Are you wanting to just apply it to a subset of those meals? Because that could get very complicated. Are you wanting to say that independent schools who offer universal meals are eligible for the local foods incentive in addition to all the public schools?
I don't think there's any intent to make it complicated. I think it just felt like while we were thinking about the other bill and we were thinking about it at the same time, it made a certain amount of sense. And I'll also just point out that ultimately the farmer, here anyway, is the beneficiary of this. It's not the school. The school gets the incentive and they buy the local product. So they're passing the money through in a sense. So the fact that it's independent school doesn't seem to be necessarily relevant. So. Representative Cole?
Another piece to consider is that the LFI program is brand new, and I think that might be one of the reasons that we were left over with, $100,000 or something dollars. And I do anticipate that in 2023 there will be a serious uptick in the amount of schools that are at least aware of the program and then go ahead and apply. In addition to this another piece adding on, which is that Vermont and the USDA signed on to a cooperative agreement to expand local foods purchasing. And so, for example, my school in Hartford, because of its size, will be offered an additional $4,000 to $5,000 to start incorporating more local foods because of the USDA program here. And so that in combination with, that in itself is more incentive to go for the LFI grant, because even if it's not a large amount of money, this is a little bit of an extra kickstart
Interesting.
too. And so I think, all school districts will be eligible for this USDA program as well.
I can speak to that a little bit more. This was some grant funding that USDA gave the state that ended up going through the Agency of Agriculture. And my understanding is they're gonna, I think you heard about this the other day, they're gonna make it available as a credit through food hubs. So each school will get a certain amount of a credit at each food hub. And that is meant to build some of those relationships. And USDA gave states a lot of ability to design a program that they thought would encourage some more local foods purchasing. And so we consulted with the Agency of Agriculture on some ideas, and this is what they ultimately came up with. And I can't remember about what we determined in terms of whether those foods purchased with those with that credit would count towards the local foods incentive. So I can look into that and find out for sure for you.
Thank you. All right, so, yeah.
Could I just ask that earlier question?
Please,
Rosie
yes.
might know. So Rosie, if this committee was the federal government and we said, how much is this feeding these kids in Vermont universal school meals gonna cost us, the federal government? Do we have a number for that? Because it'd be interesting to.
You mean how much federal funding are we drawing down
Yeah.
by doing statewide universal meals?
What's the federal government in for with this program?
I don't know off the top of my head, but that's something we can definitely calculate for sure.
That'd be great. Because it would give context to the 27 to 30 million too.
Yeah, no, so pre-COVID, we were drawing down around $22 million in federal funds, and it will be much higher now because we're serving so many more meals, but I will have to do the math to find out for sure what.
Thank you.
So just committee wrapping things up on that topic, I think, for now, although happy to hear more. And when we come back tomorrow, I don't think we're going to be voting on this because we haven't got language even in front of us. But so we won't be voting, but we'll be trying to finalize, I think, that piece of it. Also, and maybe tomorrow we can finalize the universal school meals bill itself, and we still have the question that we were addressing earlier on how we want to handle that. So strong feelings, thoughts, not on whether we should pass the bill. I think we'll have that conversation and we'll vote on that, but whether we want to say, fine, we will not just mandate that schools provide meals, but that we will fund it for them. And likewise with daycare centers that have pre-K programs, that small handful that are going to be required also to provide, that we will also fund them. Recognizing that Rosie's still waiting to hear from USDA perhaps with the answer to that question, but I just wanted to hear whether anybody had strong feelings on that, one way or the other. Or whether you'd like to hear from Rosie before answering that question.
I'd like to hear just from Rosie when she hears back from the USDA. I think that clarity is important.
I think I would advise you to assume that those independent schools and childcare centers can cover the cost out of their tuition until we hear otherwise from USDA, because that has been our practice so far, and that's in memos that we've written to independent schools about doing universal meals. We've told them that they can cover those costs with their tuition dollars. So unless we hear something different from them, that's how we would proceed. But I will certainly alert the committee if we hear something different.
Is there any information that the committee would like that we don't feel we have in answering this question, to answer this question?
There's one piece that I did want to mention to you, not directly related to this.
Yes.
So you had some discussion the other day. We had in our memo that we'd like you to let us know whether state-approved education programs should be included or not. And I thought that I heard you say that you did not want to include them, but I also heard some questions from you all about parent-child centers. And I wanted to make sure that you are aware that the state-approved education programs are parent-child centers. So if you were hoping to cover parent-child centers, you should include state-approved education programs. Currently, none of them are participating in the school meals programs. Some of them are participating, almost all of them are participating in the child and adult care food program, but they are eligible if they wanted to in the future to participate generally in the school meals programs. The way you have H-165 written right now, they would not be eligible for the universal meals funds.
Okay, and we can have Beth also say something if we need clarification on that. But the way it's written right now, they would not be eligible. None of them are offering at the moment breakfast or lunch through the national programs. And those parent-child centers and whoever else might be part of that list, if the list were able to grow, I don't know whether it is. Those programs generally are funded out of the general fund. State funding for the
I don't know how they're funded. That's other folks that who deal with that. But I do know that they are eligible to participate in the federal school meals programs. They're also eligible to participate in the federal child and adult care food program, and that's where they're currently participating. But you do have in state law that these sites, these locations are eligible to receive the reduced price student payment. And they're not called out specifically to allow them to receive universal meals funds should they decide to participate in the National School Lunch Program in the future.
Okay. Representative O'Brien.
I can't remember what the answer was on the so-called therapeutic schools. Do they all fall under?
The therapeutic schools are all generally state approved. So then we would be state approved independent schools. So then we would be looking at, is the student publicly tuitioned or not? So a therapeutic school that included many publicly tuitioned students or really high need students would be getting the funds. If they didn't include a lot of independent, a lot of publicly tuitioned students, then they wouldn't be getting the funds.
So I'm going to suggest that for the sake of argument and just moving forward, that we ask Beth to draft some language that has the program funding the childcare programs that also have pre-K, and that we not fund these approved programs, the 6. This is not the way it has to be in the end, but to show us that, and then it would be an opportunity for anybody in the committee who thinks we should be handling it differently to weigh in and say so.
Do I have anything for the calendar?
I don't think so. Do we have anything for the calendar?
Thank you. And are those the only 2 outstanding questions on that, on the 165? Please come up to the chair. Sure, yeah.
That's for James, Office of Legislative Counsel. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I do have questions.
Yeah.
While you decide if those are the only outstanding committee questions.
Not hearing anybody remembering any others, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Funding, so you want to see language that allows the nonprofit childcare programs that run the pre-qualified pre-K program qualify to participate in the universal meal supplement reimbursement. Is that accurate?
Yes, and is it accurate to say that the existing language does that?
I believe that's how AOE has treated them. Is that accurate, Rosie?
So that is how we treated them, but I think based on your direction to specifically exclude the independent schools who are part of a public school SFA, we would feel a lot less secure in that interpretation. So previously you didn't mention anything about how we should handle independent schools or childcares that are part of a public school SFA. So that's what led us to include all of those and provide the public school full reimbursement for those programs. But because you're specifically now calling out the independent schools that are part of a public school SFA and saying they should be treated as an independent school, I would not make the same interpretation this, in the upcoming year based on that language as I did this past year.
So in the language that the direction that AOE provided kind of at the start of this conversation a couple weeks ago, I drafted language that you all haven't seen yet, but it's there, that gives AOE direction on how to account for just those publicly funded students in the approved independent schools. I think that's what Rosie's talking about. So for the pre-K, for the childcare centers, it's a similar question. In the approved independent schools, I think it's a relatively easy concept to understand. You've got private payers and you've got kiddos who are receiving their publicly funded education in a private school. In the daycare center, you've got non-pre-kindergarten children who may qualify for all kinds of state subsidies who are in the childcare program, and the pre-K children. It's the fact that the school is not, it's the fact that the program is nonprofit and has a pre-qualified pre-kindergarten program that allows them to get swept up into the school food authority. So who is receiving the what meals are receiving the reimbursement? Is it everyone in the daycare center, or is it just the children who are on Act 166 funding, which are the pre-K children?
So the former. Again, for the sake of argument here, it's going to be inclusive.
So just all of the 0 to 5?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then I just wanted to clarify one piece about the approved education programs and the child parent centers. I believe the approved education programs, I think there's 5 or 6 of them in the state, and they are almost exclusively parenting teen programs that I believe are associated with or within a child parent center. But then there are 15 or 16 child parent centers that are regulated by DCF within the state. So not every parent-child center or child parent center is going to be an approved education program. But the approved education programs, I believe, are all affiliated with parent-child centers. So just to clarify that. I think that's it.
Got a question here from Representative Lipsky.
Again, I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench into any gearbox, but the notion of a for-profit childcare center is pretty much an oxymoron. Their staff's underpaid, the owners aren't making any money and threatening to go out of business after years of trying to squeeze life out of this important enterprise. So I've just been invited to childcare centers that are on the ropes. And I just think you show me a childcare center that's truly profitable, that's not a not-for-profit. I'd love to hear from them.
I think I hear what you're saying and we get your point. I'm sure that
I'm just making an observation. I'm not saying we should change any of our proposed language, but let's get realistic.
I'm going to let Rosie respond. I think I know what she's going to say, but she'll say it better. So go ahead, Rosie.
So USDA specifically says that for-profit schools and organizations cannot participate in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. So you can't include them per USDA. Those programs do have the option of participating in the Child and Adult Care Food Program. That is available to to all kinds of childcare centers, including for-profit childcare centers, as a business designation. So that is available to them, but our hands are kind of tied with regard to whether to include them in universal meals.
One more question, clarifying question.
Yes.
For the local foods incentive program, I understand you want to add approved independent schools is eligible to participate. I was unclear listening to the discussion that you all just had, if you want to be inclusive and allow all approved independent schools to participate, or just approved independent schools that participate in a federal school meals program. I think it's naturally self-selecting because you're the eligibility criteria is based on the national school lunch costs. But how specific do you want me to get in the language? Do you want me to tie, I guess what I should say is, do you want me to tie these programs together specifically?
I think that, well, my inclination is not having thought of that before, but to say yes. To tie them together makes sense in the context of the bill. Bearing in mind, though, that I think the intent is to help farmers, and it doesn't really matter. The money's not going to the schools ultimately; it's going to be passed through to the farmers. But happy to hear what other people think too. And if they're self-selecting, if it's going to be the same universe, then it doesn't matter all that much.
It's the reimbursement is the federal certain sense on the federal meal, the lunch. So if they're not participating in that program, then I think it's going to be kind of self-selecting, but I don't know how, it sounds like you want me to put a reference to the universal school meals supplement within the local foods incentive grant program.
That's for this draft, yeah.
And do you want this draft for your, I think 9:45 tomorrow is when I'm maybe scheduled, or?
Yeah, if
Okay.
that's feasible, that'd be great.
Okay.
I assume the entire department's gonna be working all night with all the bills we've been finalizing.
That's here tomorrow?
Yeah, we're starting at 9.
There's a drill.
9:30.
Yeah, but we're starting at 9. We're starting at 9, and yes, with understanding that there's going to be a drill at 9:30.
We're supposed to just proceed as we normally.
We don't know that there's going to be a drill.
I'm sorry.
Beth, or yeah, John.
Just to be clear, so the state approved parent-child centers that are not for profit that qualify, are they like an independent school? They could potentially opt in?
No, so there's two different things. There's two different programs. One is regulated by AOE and one is regulated by AHS. So two completely separate state agencies. Approved education programs are regulated by the State Board of Education and AOE, and they include parenting teen or teen parent programs.
Okay.
I believe that right now, the lay of the land is those programs are also kind of located within a parent-child center that DCF regulates.
Yeah.
So if the education program piece is approved by AOE and they might qualify to participate in the federal meals school lunch and breakfast program, then, and Rosie can correct me if I'm wrong, that would sweep in everyone in the program potentially. But there's also other federal meals programs that the DCF side of the world also qualifies for. So some parent-child centers may qualify to participate in the federal school lunch and breakfast programs because they have an approved education program within them. But if they don't have that approved education program within them, I don't think they would be qualifying for the school programs. There's other meal programs out there. Is that
It's not like
accurate?
they would have an option and they could say, we want this one or this.
Well, I think, yes, they can if they qualify for both, then I think they could pick either one. And it sounds like they're not picking to participate in the school meals programs. They're participating in the adult and child facility. I'm not sure
The child and adult care food program is the other option that only feeds students up to, or children up to age 12 in this particular usage. So these programs are currently not using any federal programs to feed any teens. But the ones that do have an approved state education program for those teens could instead choose to participate in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program. And Beth is right that would then allow them to offer that to all of their kids and they wouldn't need to participate in CACFP. And if they did that and you made changes to allow them to qualify for universal, for the universal meal supplement, then they would access those funds. But right now there's nothing in the bill that would allow those entities to access those funds because they're not considered a state, they're not an independent school and they're not a public school. And those are the two entities that you provided the universal meal supplement for in the current bill.
Okay.
I think I have my direction.
All right, thank you. So before we leave, a long time ago, earlier this afternoon, we all held our questions to the NOFA representatives and farmers who were here. And I did promise that we'd have a chance to discuss those if people wanted to raise them. Alternatively, if there are questions that you just want to shoot to somebody there, we can do that. We can type them up, send them to Laura, and we can get them into the right hands. And then we can have a conversation, another time separately. So I will just say I want to acknowledge that we tried to do too much today, specifically with covering the PES section at the beginning, and too much with too many people coming in with not enough time to follow up and ask questions. And we will have more opportunities to do better. And when I say we, I'm talking about me, the royal we. I mean, I think it's not realistic to expect anybody to sit in that chair and get up after 5 minutes. Constitutionally, we can't as humans. We're not. It's hard to do that, and then to have 9 people do that just doesn't seem like that's going to be realistic. So I think scheduling wise, we'll try and be more mindful of what really works. We need to stay on a schedule. We need to allow ourselves a chance to get up and stretch and clear our heads. We need to allow time for those follow-up conversations, even if there are any questions. So it was, I think just too much to squeeze into the time we had. And it's late, and we've had 2 other serious conversations since then too. So we'll I'm not promising this will never happen again, but we'll try to be mindful of that.
That's great.
But before we go, things that you want to just put out there related to that conversation or anything else? Yeah, Dave.
It just seemed that there was a lot of concern about how the program is going to be ushered out, concerning, who is getting paid for what. And that there's definitely some ideas from multiple sides as to how that money should be paid in ecosystem services. And I think it was great to hear the kind of counter argument today. And yeah.
Yeah, so we know and we've heard that the group and the group was represented, had a representative from NOFA. Group came to a consensus, but we also know that doesn't mean that there weren't other ideas, counter ideas that aren't necessarily inconsistent with what they arrived at. They're more perhaps. And so I think we will. We all need to learn more about what this is all about. And encouraged to hear that they're willing to come back and talk and dig into what it's all about and what the alternatives might be.
Acknowledging that we'll come back to this, but I just wanted to kind of as somebody that's followed some of this for a while and have been involved, been involved with extension. I just want to make sure that it's aware that this whole PES thing was really driven by farmers saying we need some help to do some of these things, and by extension, trying to help farms. So I just want to make sure that everybody is acknowledging that this was coming from a good place and that it's not like driven by, I mean, there's some overlaying huge things that play into the things, but I just want to advocate a little bit for the work that's gone into this from extension's point of view, and that farmers were really asking for some help on implementing some things that were beneficial for both the environment and for themselves.
Yeah, good.
And to follow up on Henry's point, you know, that was intriguing and overwhelming, that OFA testimony. It went off in directions that never would have occurred to me. But one thing that did occur to me, that 90% of their dialogue with regard to the working lands was directed at farming, whereas maybe 70% of the working lands are forests, as far as doing the heavy lifting with, in terms of greenhouse gas. And unlike the farming community, it's interesting. Farmers are also farm owners, but loggers or folks that work in the woods are generally not woodland owners. They could be mostly private, but some are corporate. But more and more, historically in the last 15 years, more and more has been asked of the logger. Before they set foot in the woods, they have to put in infrastructure, which costs money, additional equipment, maintain that infrastructure through the entire harvest, or be subject to fines or being shut down, and obviously closing out at the end of the job. So I just would like to see that loggers and or forest owners be considered, not just go do the work, go out of business, and then maybe there'll be some younger folks coming into the business. It just doesn't work that way, realistically. So I think they need to have consideration too. As you've told me in some of your brother's history, you know, it's better to do anything, but, well, you know. Anyway, I'm not whining. On the contrary, I just think it's an important focus in the big goal.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, John.
Just one quick thing. Could we get an update on what's happening with the 9.2 million for organic farmers? Because we passed this, the House did, and whether, if it's dead, then we should think of what our next steps are.
Oh, yeah, good point. So the Senate, my understanding anyway, is that the Senate has stripped it out of the budget adjustment.
Right.
We are having, there've been some conversations about the Senate being more agreeable to having the funding in the actual budget, which is problematic in the sense that it's later, time-wise. But there's possibility, again, a possibility of having the language in the budget say that if everyone's on board with it, the funding, it would go out immediately when the bill is passed, signed. So not waiting until July, not waiting until next fiscal year, but having it be available, you know, in May. And in theory, the agency would be ready to actually start writing checks then, by having, would give them plenty of time to work out a way to do that. So that's where we are. Yeah.
Would this committee then have to revisit it? I mean, it would be a recommendation again, to say appropriations?
Yeah, so procedure wise, I think so, yes. Yeah, so we can put that in our memo, which may not be an actual memo this year. The format is more of a grid, but yeah. Good. Yeah, good point. Anything else? Okay, we're done.